The Philadelphia Eagles have the best roster in the NFL heading into the 2025 season, but I do think even this roster will have some surprise cuts this summer. I'll tell you who those players could be coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to this Tuesday edition of the show. I'm your host, Louis DiBiase, as always. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL in all capital letters for $20 off your first purchase. So I think the Eagles, by far, this season, in 2025, even with the departures of Josh Sweat in free agency and Milton Williams and Darius Slay, CJ Gardner-Johnson with the injury of Nakobe Dean, the departure of Mekhi Becton on offense, even with a lot of core pieces of that 2024 Super Bowl winning roster leaving Philadelphia this past offseason, I still think by far this is the deepest and most complete team, not just in the NFC, but in the entire NFL. But even this Eagles roster that feels like it's set up beautifully for both the short term and the long term. I think this is the best roster that not only Howie Roseman has ever put together from a combination of a long-term and short-term perspective, but I think it's the best core they've ever built in NFL history, in Eagles history, I should say, in franchise history. However, this summer, I do still think there could be some surprise names that get cut in August. You're like, whoa, I actually thought that player was going to start this year. I thought he was going to be a key rotational piece of the defense, or he was going to be a primary backup. I do think there are some players, even on this loaded roster, that the Eagles might decide at the end of July and August, this just isn't the guy, and maybe we need to find upgrades within the roster. Maybe there's some surprise players that rise up that you didn't think would, Reed Blankenship did back in 2022. Maybe there's some undrafted rookie from this past draft or a late day 3 selection that makes other players expendable. Or there's a player that becomes available outside the Eagles organization in the trade market, in free agency, that you feel like could be an upgrade. I do think it's likely that happens at least to one position. I'm not saying it's going to happen a lot across this roster because, again, it is pretty set. But I think there are going to be some surprise cuts on both offense and defense. I do think there's actually more surprise cut options on offense, though, than the defensive side of the football, which might be surprising to some, considering the Eagles lost a lot more players on defense this offseason than offense. And the defensive side of the football is younger, doesn't feel like as much of the surefire top 5, top 10 unit that the offense is going to be with all the star veterans they have on top 10 contracts. The defense, it's again a little bit more of a projection like it was last year. Even though I said on the show yesterday, I think this is going to be a top 3 defense in the league, the floor versus the ceiling, it is definitely a higher variance than the offense. And yet, I do think the surprise cuts are actually on the offensive side of the ball. The number one guy that I'm thinking about with this, when we're talking about a surprise cut, that to me means it's a player that you actually think could be a starter. The Eagles brought in with a pretty solid contract in free agency, or they traded for this guy, or maybe he was an early draft pick over the last few years that you think is going to have a role in 2025. He's going to be a starter or a primary role player, and suddenly he gets cut. That's what I define as a surprise cut. I think that player on offense is Kenyon Green at right guard. The Eagles, again, trading with the Houston Texans, that CJ Gardner-Johnson trade, I think it was more about clearing the books long-term, giving the Texans Gardner-Johnson, right? I think it was more about getting rid of Gardner-Johnson than it was about acquiring Kenyon Green. But at the same time, the Eagles, you could clearly see what the idea was behind bringing in Kenyon Green as a part of that trade. It's the same logic they had last year when they signed Mekhi Becton after the draft. It's very similar logic to what they're doing with Azeez Ojulari this year or Joshua Uche. It's a former top pick, first or second round player that has a lot of talent that just hasn't met that ceiling for one reason or another. It makes them very cheap, low risk, high reward type of move. it worked out beautifully last year with Mekhi Becton. Give Jeff Stoutland, who I think is the greatest offensive line coach in the history of the NFL, another player with raw ability and see if he can get the most out of that guy. That was the logic. I do think people expect Kenyon Green this year to compete with Tyler Steen, although he's not seen as the favorite to beat out Steen like Becton was later on in the summer last year. I do think that Nick Sirianni has said it. Jeff Stoutland has alluded to it. I think fans and media alike have an understanding that Steen's the favorite to start, but it is an open competition. And the top two contenders, there are a lot of contenders in this right guard battle, including a lot of the rookies from this past class, but the top two contenders are Tyler Steen and Kenyon Green. But Kenyon Green, although he was a top 15 pick in the 2022 NFL draft, his tape has been terrible in Houston. Like, he was traded from the Texans for a reason after just a couple years, and Houston needs offensive line help, and they were very willing to get rid of Kenyon Green. So to me, that tells you that this is no sure thing to be Mekhi Becton 2.0. And if Tyler Steen does end up being a solid high floor starter and he doesn't lose the job this summer, and maybe you see some real progress from at least one or two of these rookies in Hinton, Williams, and Kendall. If you see at least a couple of those guys coming along and they're cross-training at right guard and they're turning heads, and Matt Pryor is a solid veteran with starting experience that you drafted in 2018 and you want him in this building, if that happens, I could totally see Kenyon Green getting cut. Like, if he is struggling and is not looking like Jeff Stoutland's next amazing reclamation project, I could see them say, we'd much rather keep Cameron Williams for the upside of him potentially being a long-term Lane Johnson replacement at right tackle with the traits that he has, and he can be a primary backup at guard. We'd rather keep him and Hinton and Kendall, these guys we just invested in the draft, than Kenyon Green. I think he's actually the number one surprise cut for the Eagles this summer. I'm not predicting it. I do think he has a legitimate chance to beat out Tyler Steen. I think he has a higher ceiling than Tyler Steen. Again, this is a guy that was a top 15 pick for a reason. And I believe in Jeff Stoutland. His track record, his resume speaks for itself. I'm not going to doubt Stoutland University. But if Green is not improving early on compared to who he was in Houston, I don't think they're going to keep him because they traded for him and because of his draft status over some of these other players that they have. Like, they have a lot of guard options. Even a guy I didn't mention today, but I've mentioned on the show in the past, is second-year guard Trevor Keegan, who they drafted out of Michigan last year on day 3. He's been cross-training at center as well. So these are versatile pieces that the Eagles might not want to get rid of, and I think Kenyon Green could be on the outs if he does not beat out Tyler Steen, or if it's not even close. Like, if Steen is so clearly the guy, Green could be a surprise roster cut. I think on offense, there's a couple other depth pieces too that we're expecting to make the 53-man roster that might not. Like, at wide receiver, the other day I was talking up Danny Gray. It sounds like he is really turning heads so far at minicamp, showing off that speed that made him somebody I really liked a couple years ago out of the draft coming out of SMU. Maybe Danny Gray steals a roster spot. Maybe Terrace Marshall Jr., who Jalen Hurts mentioned by name in his press conference a couple weeks ago, who's a former day 2 pick as well. Maybe those two guys really shine in camp and the preseason. If they do, Johnny Wilson and Anias Smith were day 3 picks from the Eagles just a year ago, and Howie Roseman is very bullish on draft picks. He does not like to give up on them early, but I could see at least one of them being a surprise cut. If Terrace Marshall Jr. or Danny Gray earn a roster spot, I don't think Johnny Wilson and Anias Smith are completely safe. And I think Wilson is more of a lock than Smith, but I wouldn't be surprised if one of them gets cut. And the other guy is at running back, A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon, I think, could be a very good backup to Saquon Barkley. He has that physicality, that size that I really like as a compliment to Saquon, especially if you're taking on more carries. I like Will Shipley as the second running back leading your team in touches, but if Saquon got injured, I don't think Shipley can handle a RB1 workload. So I like Dillon's potential there. As a former second-round pick, he does have a lot of production when he was with the Packers, but he missed an entire year with a neck injury. Could this be Rashad Penny 2.0, where it's a big name that we all know of, a former first or second-round pick, but his health just keeps him off the field? I could see that. if Montrell Johnson, the undrafted rookie out of Florida, turns heads this year and maybe is your next Corey Clement, I don't think A.J. Dillon's safe either. So those are the four bigger names, I'd say, on offense that could be surprise cuts. Kenyon Green, Johnny Wilson, Anais Smith, and A.J. Dillon. And then on defense, I think it's two players some might expect to be starters or key pieces to the rotation. Adoree Jackson at corner, I don't think there's really any way that he is starting. Because to me, Kelee Ringo's the favorite to be the outside corner. If he doesn't win the job, I think there's no way Adoree Jackson just completely beats him out. It would be the worst case scenario, a plan B where Kelee just loses the job. If that's the case, they did bring in Adoree Jackson to be a veteran, experienced emergency player in case Ringo doesn't become who they want to. But in that scenario, I don't think they would just settle and be like, okay, Ringo's not the guy, it's Adoree Jackson. I think they would pursue Jair Alexander at that point, or Asante Samuel Jr., or Rasul Douglas, or they would trade for like a Greg Newsome from the Cleveland Browns. I don't think Adoree Jackson is going to be a starter this year. And if Eli Ricks continues to improve in year 3, I think there's a better chance. I'm not predicting it. I think it's more likely, though, that Adoree Jackson is cut than being a starter over Ringo this year. I just don't think he's very good anymore. I think he has clearly lost a step the last few years, and it's good to have a veteran in that room, and maybe he proves me wrong this summer, and maybe he's just a good primary backup, but I don't think he's a starter. I think it's much more likely he's like a surprise roster cut than he beats out Ringo this summer. So I would say it's Ringo on defense, and then Josh Uche, who, again, the other day I was talking up. I think the Eagles could get him back to who he was in 2022, but if not, the Eagles have Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, Azeez Ojulari, Antoine Powell-Ryland could be one of the steals of the draft. That kid had 16 sacks as an elite RAS prospect coming out of Virginia Tech last year. I could see him being a niche pass rushing specialist that they keep over Josh Uche, and they re-signed Patrick Johnson, who's been a very important special teams player to the Eagles in years past, and that's somebody they drafted. Uche is not safe either. There are no guarantees in his contract. You could say the same about Azeez Ojulari, but I think Uche is, the riskier player when it comes to his 53-man roster status. So I think Uche and Jackson, those could be the two players on defense that you're like, whoa, I thought they were going to have primary roles this year on defense, and instead, they're not even on the 53. So those are some surprise roster cut options this summer. Let me know what you think. Hit us up on X at DiBiase LOE and at Locked on Birds. Coming up next, Saquon Barkley. I think he had the most dominant season an Eagles non-quarterback has ever had in franchise history. Who else would be in that top 5? We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs. The NBA Finals right now is at 3-2. Pacers Thunder. It's been back and forth. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live, and this year's matchups are already delivering. If you want in, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats for Game 6, maybe a Game 7. Even for the biggest playoff games, prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off. And with the killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Gametime is a total game changer. I also love that you can see your exact view of your seat before you buy, so there's no surprises. You'll find great seats for as low as $100 this NFL season as well, thanks to exclusive discounts. It's not just sports, though. You can get theater tickets, comedy, and so much more. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code in all capital letters Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so I've made the case on the show for Saquon Barkley having maybe the most accomplished individual season a non-quarterback has had in the history of the NFL. It was the best running back season any player has ever had. It was the most rushing yards in one season ever when you combine the regular season and the postseason. I'm willing to go as far to say I think that was, and there's been some dominant seasons by Eagles. I think that is the most dominant season an individual Eagles player has ever had in one season. And this is removing quarterbacks, because and I want to do my top 5 rankings of the most dominant years a player has ever had in franchise history, because it was interesting to go down the line and see like who that isn't a quarterback would belong on that list. Quarterback would be obvious, right? If it was quarterback involved too, 2017 Carson Wentz is in there. 2010 Michael Vick. I would say 2022 Jalen Hurts. You could make the argument for Nick Foles, 27-2 and 2013. Like the whole list would be quarterbacks. 1990 Randall Cunningham as the MVP runner-up. 2004 Donovan McNabb. You could almost make a top 10 with just quarterbacks alone. So I did a top 5 ranking of most dominant Eagles seasons for non-Eagles quarterbacks. Saquon Barkley, of course, starts this list off at number 1. Again, the numbers absolutely speak for themselves, and that was a typo in that graphic. It's supposed to say 2024 Saquon Barkley. Again, the most rushing yards in a single season in NFL history when you combine the regular season and the playoffs. He would have broken the single season, regular season rushing touchdown record, or rushing yard record, if he wasn't rested, week 18. He had over 2,000 rushing yards, 15 total touchdowns, 13 on the ground, 2 in the air. 7 games this year surpassed 145 rushing yards in the regular season. 11 surpassed 100 in the regular season. 3 of 4 playoff games had over 100 rushing yards for Saquon. He had 200 plus against LA in that divisional round. He actually tied Barry Sanders and Terrell Davis for the most 100-yard rushing games in a single season with 14 total. 11 in the regular season, 3 in the playoffs. He became the first player ever with 6 touchdown runs of 60-plus yards. Like, that stat is absolutely insane. Again, he had 6 rushing touchdowns this year. 6 of over 60 yards. Like, that's better than what Deshaun Jackson used to do at wide receiver, and this is a running back doing that in 2024. He was the main reason that you won the Super Bowl against a dynasty in Kansas City. I mean, that's, to me, the most dominant year an Eagle has ever had, and maybe they'll ever have. It's the best season a player at that position has ever had. So that's the GOAT year, and I think that has to be number 1. He had one of the greatest highlight plays in the history of football with the backwards leap. So I think Saquon is obviously number 1. A close number 2, though, and it's really just based on one insanely ridiculous historic stat, but I had to put Reggie White, 1987, as the second most dominant year an Eagles ever had. Non-quarterback. 21 sacks in 12 games. Just think about that. 21 sacks. The NFL now has 17 games, and guys are just making it to 15, it feels like. Even the best of the best don't always get to 15 plus. You know, Trey Hendrickson's had back-to-back 17-sack seasons, like Myles Garrett's been up there. Hassan Reddick for the Eagles had a 16-sack season in 2022, but it's tough for even the best of the best nowadays to get over 15 sacks with how fast quarterbacks get rid of the football. Reggie White had 21 sacks, which was an NFL record at the time, in 12 games, and 5 less games than the NFL plays now because of the NFL strikes of that 87 season. They played in 4 less games, 5 less than they do right now, and he had 21. Like, that is, when you talk about the most impressive statistics, records, feats in the history of this league, that's got to be top 5, top 3. Is it the most impressive stat of all time? Like, to get 21 and 12 is just ridiculous. It's the best pass rushing season anybody's ever had and probably ever will have. And you can make the argument he's the greatest pass rusher of all time. So Saquon, 2024, that's number 1, but 1987 Reggie White, 21 sacks in 12 games. That to me is number 2, and that one stat just speaks for itself. Number 3, A.J. Brown's 2023 season is the 3rd most dominant season an Eagle has ever had. That run he had in, I believe it was October and November, where he broke the NFL record for most consecutive games of at least 125 receiving yards or more. He had 6 straight games of 125 plus. That was before Saquon Barkley's 2024 season. That was the most dominant Eagle I've ever seen on offense. I mean, he was just unbelievable every single game. And when you think about what that team was like at that time, the run game was pretty inconsistent. Jalen Hurts was kind of up and down. The defense clearly had regressed from the 2022 defense that was atop the league. A.J. Brown was a huge reason that team started off 10-1. And some of the catches he was pulling off, like for our YouTube viewers, this one-hander in D.C. against Washington in that shootout, or pretty much the game winner against Emmanuel Forbes in that other game against the Commanders at home where he puts the ball in his lap right after. Like, A.J. Brown was on another level. That was the best wide receiver play I've ever seen from an Eagle. And I've seen some incredible years from, Deshaun Jackson and even Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown in other years, 2022, 2024. You could talk about Terrell Owens in 2004. But 2023 A.J. Brown was the best receiver in football. It was one of the most dominant runs a receiver has ever had. Again, that was the NFL record. 6 straight games of at least 125 yards. And that was in an offense with Devontae Smith, with Dallas Goedert, with Jalen Hurts running the football, DeAndre Swift. For him to do what he did that month-and-a-half run where the Eagles just were not losing, and they were beating, by the way, some really damn good teams, that to me is easily number 3. The 4th most dominant season an Eagles ever had, I would say, is LaShawn McCoy in 2013. McCoy that year, Shady won the NFL rushing title. He also set the Eagles' single-season scrimmage yard record with over 2,000 yards from scrimmage. I believe, to be exact, it was 2,146 scrimmage yards. He had 1,607 yards on the ground. Again, that won the rushing title by almost 300 yards. Matt Forte was second that year. He had 52 catches for 539 receiving yards through the air. So again, 2146 scrimmage yards, 2,146 total yards through the air and on the ground. That was at the time, before Saquon Barkley just broke it, that was the most ever by an Eagle in a single season. Oh, by the way, he also had 11 touchdowns on top of it. The fact that was what Chip Kelly got from Shady in year 1, and he only wanted this guy on his team for one more season, is unbelievable. Chip Kelly's ego was so big that he saw that historic season from LaShawn McCoy and said, yep, that's because of my offense. Like, that had nothing to do with Shady. DeMarco Murray can do that. Ryan Matthews will be able to do that. No problem. Frank Gore, if he agrees to a deal, which he didn't, he could do that. No problem. Like, insane for Chip to think that Shady was some, like, system piece. But again, that was Chip Kelly's ego. And the fact that that's what he saw the first year of being an NFL head coach was McCoy putting together a historic season, and he traded him less than 2 years later is just, to this day, mind-boggling, especially for what they got in Kiko Alonso. That trade still to this day makes me mad. And then the 5th most dominant year a non-Eagles quarterback has ever had, to me, is 2022 Lane Johnson. And it's kind of just pick your season with Lane from 2020 to 2024. Why I said 2022 is that was the year he set the record for the most consecutive games a tackle or an offensive lineman in general has ever gone without allowing a sack. Lane Johnson went from 2020 to 2022. He went 27 straight games, which again is an NFL record, without allowing a single sack. Do you know what that entails? Especially for a tackle in the modern day NFL that plays every down. Pass rushers can switch in and out of the lineup, so they're fresh. Some of the best pass rushers in the league now play on the left side, hanging over Lane Johnson on the right side of the offensive line. They don't really give him help a lot. He's constantly on an island. His quarterbacks, for the most part, have always been mobile, so sometimes they kind of run into traffic. And Lane went 27 straight games without allowing a sack. I think outside of Reggie White's 21 sacks in 12 games, that might be the second most impressive stat in Eagles history. Like, Saquon has the quantity of stats and records in 2024 that puts him at number 1. But when it comes to the most, like, just jaw-dropping single statistics in Eagles history that just blow your mind, I think it's Reggie White, 21 sacks in 12 games. And then for me, it's Lane Johnson going 3 years pretty much. And you could argue 4 years, depending on what platform you ask. This guy went 3 to 4 years, an entire contract length of games where he didn't allow it. A sack was not his fault. Unbelievable. So those are my top 5 most dominant individual seasons an Eagle has ever had. Saquon Barkley from 2024, he's number 1. I would say number 2 is 1987 Reggie White. Number 3 is 2023 A.J. Brown. Number 4 is 2013 LaShawn McCoy. And then number 5 is 2022 Lane Johnson. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. It's been a fun offseason. The Eagles are Super Bowl champions, and I was talking with my good friend Tyler Rowland from Locked On Titans, and we had this fun exercise before we did Locked On NFL where we were ranking our favorite types of off seasons. I'm going to get into that coming up next. I'll let you know what I mean right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. It's the offseason. It's the dog days of the offseason, the dead zone, as I like to call it. So I'm kind of losing track of the days. Eagles training camp is still 5 weeks away, so we're getting there for sure. But I will say it's been an incredible offseason. And the Eagles didn't make a lot of splash moves in free agency. They lost a lot of players. It was a maintenance year for sure to, maintain this window long-term of competing for Super Bowls. They did a lot of things this year they didn't want to do, but they had to be done. And they were lessons learned from the 2018 offseason, the last time they were Super Bowl champions. But just having an offseason where you're the champs, you're the gold standard of the NFL. Everybody's making moves to try to be who you are and to try to beat you next year. That's a really great feeling, and it makes free agency a lot more fun. And the draft, like getting Jahad Campbell, was such an exciting first pick. And I was talking to my good friend Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans, who I host with on Locked On NFL Mondays. You can go check that out on the Locked On Podcast Network. We were talking about what are the best kind of off seasons, because right now he's going through the Titans having Cam Ward, first overall pick. It's all just positive vibes. Every day you just want to see and hear about growth with Cam. You can't really win or lose. You can't lose this offseason unless Cam Ward, if you're a Titans fan, is just a complete bust. Every day is fun to just see the progress. He just made one play where it was a no-look pass over the middle of the field, rolling to his left, throwing across his body. So we were talking about the best kind of off seasons. So I ranked my top 5 favorite types of off seasons. Number 1 for me is the off season after you win a Super Bowl. Because again, like I said, it makes everything else easier to stomach. If you lose players in free agency, it's so much fun to see how you try to build back a team that can repeat. You're the gold standard of the league. Everybody's talking about you for months and months. How does this team replicate what the Eagles did? Are the Eagles trendsetters? What are teams doing now to try to replicate what Howie Roseman's doing? They're attacking the tush push, trying to get rid of a play the Eagles do so well because they're the champs and all eyes are on them. Being the hunted, I feel personally is a lot of fun. And again, it's months worth of celebrating being champions with no games playing, and you get to be champs for 6 months before the season kicks off again. So for me, I think that's easily the most fun offseason. The ring ceremony will be coming up soon in early July. The Eagles will get that ring with 2 Lombardi trophies on it, so that'll be exciting. For me, that's easily the number 1 offseason to go through as a fan. Number 2, though, is exactly what Tyler Rowland is going through. That first offseason with a rookie quarterback that you drafted, I would say with a top 5, top 10 pick, especially if it's the number 1 overall pick like Cam Ward was, or Carson Wentz was the 2nd overall pick in 2016. That 2016 offseason was some of the most fun I've ever had as a football fan, as an Eagles fan, because again, that whole season in general, even though they went 7-9, it was all about progress and development with this player. So, sometimes if you lost, that was okay. If Carson Wentz showed legitimate development, if he made these splash plays that you're going to watch all week, it was so fun that offseason to see Carson Wentz for the first time in an Eagles jersey. How's he doing in training camp? Hearing the play-by-play breakdown from all the beat reporters, seeing him for the first time come out there in the preseason. And again, there's just so much hype. And it's such a refreshing feeling of hope when you have a new face of the franchise. Especially when the Eagles just got Carson Wentz, it was years and years of recycled veteran players like Sam Bradford and even Nick Foles to a degree, and Michael Vick, Kevin Cobb. It was the first time since 1999 that the Eagles had a guy they drafted or really invested a significant amount in to be the face of the franchise long term. And so that to me is the second most fun offseason, because you can't really, in regular season in general, just overall season in general, because you can't really lose unless they just become like the biggest bust in NFL history. There's just so much hype and excitement surrounding that first year with a top pick that is a quarterback. That to me is my second kind of offseason for sure. Number 3 is the offseason after a surprise playoff run where you have a rookie on a quarterback contract, on a rookie deal. You have a rookie quarterback contract. You made a surprise playoff run, and now you got a lot of cap space because, again, your quarterback's not getting paid a whole lot, and you're going all in. You're being aggressive. So this to me is the Eagles after 2021 surprisingly make the wild card round that year. I don't think any of us expected them to be a playoff team, but they did it. They exceeded expectations, and suddenly we thought, okay, maybe this window is now. Maybe this window could be now. We have a lot of cap space. Jalen Hurts is on a day 2 rookie deal. Like, let's go all in. Let's go after Hassan Reddick and Kazir White and James Bradbury, and we're going to trade for A.J. Brown, and we're going to trade up for Jordan Davis, and we're going to try even before that, even if it doesn't work, to give a big contract to somebody like Marcus Williams, the top safety on the open market. That to me is a really fun year because you exceeded expectations, so there's already a hype around that about being an unexpected playoff team, and now you're like, okay, whoa, like how do we now get from good to great? We have all this draft capital, all this money, all this salary cap space. Like, the time is now. This quarterback could be the guy, and he's making no money. Let's maximize that window. That kind of offseason has happened to the Eagles twice and has led to them getting to the Super Bowl in both of those following seasons. Like, that's why that 2017 offseason was so fun, too, is 2016, they didn't make the playoffs, but we saw a lot of growth from Carson Wentz. Everybody believed he was the guy. Rookie contract, okay, we need to get him some weapons. Go out there and get him Torrey Smith, Alshon Jeffrey, LeGarrette Blount. Go out there and trade for Timmy Jernigan and Ronald Darby. Like, that was a really fun offseason. So to me, that's number 3, is that surprise run with a rookie contracted quarterback. Go be aggressive that next offseason. Those are some of the best years. 2017 and 2022, those were 2 of the best off seasons that I've ever had as an Eagles fan. And then I would say the 2 worst, I'd say number 4 is bottoming out, that rebuild year. It's not dead last because although that sucks, at least you have a top draft pick to get excited about. Likely you will have a lot of salary cap space because you're dumping a lot of players into the open market. You're probably not a very good team at that point, so your payroll probably isn't that high. That's obviously not fun because your team was terrible the year before, but at least I think rebuilding is fun in the offseason because you're going to have a lot of activity. Your team's going to be making a lot of moves to improve. So I would say that's number 4. And then number 5, post-Super Bowl loss, just the worst. You got all the way there. You didn't get it done. You got to sit with that. There's no football for half a year. That 2023 offseason, after they lost Super Bowl 57, just awful. Like, that was just torturous for half a year. And they made a lot of fun moves that offseason, but it didn't matter because you're just trying to get over that loss forever. So that to me was by far the worst kind of offseason. Let me know what you think. Again, hit us up at X, at LockdownBirds, at DiBiase, LOE. You can check out our YouTube community page as well. Let us know what you're thinking. Each and every day, Monday through Friday, we got a podcast for you right here on Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. We'll see you tomorrow. Until then, thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.